everyone here is going to have an impact on what we're talking about. We're sitting in the multi-purpose room at USA Swimming, and I'm kind of looking around and seeing a lot of pictures of greats up on the wall, and I can't help but think that, some of the conversations we're having today and people that might be in your program could one day be on these walls, and it doesn't matter if you're a college coach, if you're a high school coach, if you're an 8 and under coach, we all have a part to play in this role to make USA Butterfly better internationally at the podium. That's the best thing about our system is we all contribute. So thank you so much for having time out of your day to be a part of this and for being a soldier in the trenches on this. So let's get started. So this concept, as you can see on your screen, is we're calling the revolution the Butterfly Revolution. That's the name of the movement. But let's sort of go back a few steps before we got to naming that. We just sort of thought of this concept of strengthening USA Butterfly. And in order to think of why we started that conversation, I kind of want to show a data point that we first looked at when we came back from Rio. And in order to look forward at why this is an issue, let's sort of look back at what we've accomplished and what we've done in other events and how that compares to Butterfly. So without further ado, Russell, why don't you kind of take the lead here and talk about the data that you ran on this.
Yeah, I guess I had a hunch that we had an opportunity in fly that maybe we had done better, performed better in other strokes. So I just went back and looked at the medalists by stroke over the last 4 Olympics and was actually surprised to see how it all went out. Obviously, we know that we're great in backstroke, and U.S. has always had great backstrokers coming through the ranks, and then at the very top level, and I know this is just looking at the very top, but I do feel like there's an opportunity for people to step up and for us to get better as a country. We had 13 individual medalists in backstroke, 11 individual medalists in the IMs, and then obviously you could see with the rest of the data, but then we can hone in on fly and see that there are only 4 individual fly medalists over the last 4 Olympics. And yes, you can point to Michael being a big part of that medal haul over the last 4 Olympics, but he doesn't account for the women's flyers, and also he was present in the IMs, and we had so many different male IM medalists as well.
Yeah, so as Russell was showing, this sort of in internal conversations we're having in the office, I looked at our World 100 program, which is a new program that we launched last year, and part of doing that program is just sort of measuring some 18 and under world rankings. And I looked at how we compare internationally to other countries in every stroke, every event, every Olympic event. And the kind of 2 metrics that I used was 18 under world rankings in terms of how much depth we had. So we used the top 100 world ranking for that. And then how good are we at the top end? So how many backstrokers or flyers do we have in the 100 fly, let's say, in the top 20 for an 18 under world ranking versus Japan, Australia, all the other, GB, all the other big nations. And we pretty much crushed the depth in everything, which I think we all understand why our numbers is one of our biggest strengths. But when we got to the butterfly, it was significantly closer. And, especially when we got to the top end in some cases, we saw this a little bit in the breaststroke too, but in some cases we were actually behind Japan. So, that's not to sound the alarm bells, but because that is just a snapshot of one year's data looking at these 1800 world rankings, but sort of, pairing that with what Russell's seeing at the top end, it definitely made me sort of think we need to do something with this information. And the first thing I could think of is, the Senior Development Committee is playing a big part in the World 100 program, so I wanted to take this information to them. So the idea, basically, we had a conference call with every member of the Senior Development Committee and a couple people from our USA Swimming staff, and we essentially left it, we gave this presentation up to this point and said, what should we do about this? How do you coaches feel? And the idea was to create a smaller group of coaches that could be laser focused on this issue of butterfly in the United States. Is there an issue? Why is there an issue? Are there opportunities? How can we maximize them? And the people you see on your screen there, Allison Beebe from Santa Clara, Kathleen Prindle from Performance Aquatics, Sean Smith from Hilltoppers, and Jason Roberts from Fox Jets, have been absolutely phenomenal in this, and I can honestly say that I think we've had about 5 conference calls, not to mention the ones that we've had, one-on-one discussions. But every time we leave a group call, I can just hear so much passion from these coaches about this movement, about how they want to implement it in their own clubs and LSCs, and different things they're hearing and learning about the stroke. So I'm really going to encourage everybody today that, as you see these people on deck or connect with them on social media, however they might prefer, they, through being part of this project, have really become experts on the topic. And it's not to say that, they, just because they haven't produced a gold medalist, you can't be an expert, because they're getting so many variables here that I think are amazing to share. So originally the kind of process for this is I went back and talked to some of the developmental coaches of some of the names that were on the board there. So my first conversation was with Ron Forrest, who is Dana Ballmer's developmental coach, and he just gave some really awesome information on different ways they did training, different things that motivated Dana, the amount or lack thereof of 2 flies they did at a young age. I started sharing that with the group, and then also we heard from Bob at the National Team Coaches Seminar, and that was some great notes there, and Keenan Robinson's on our staff now, and he'd kind of shared some things too about different things that they had done with Michael, and I shared that with the group. Also talked to Milton Elms, who had worked with Dana in Australia, and he's just got some phenomenal things. So I would sort of bring that information back to this group, and sort of the ideas they had, and the strategy for communication of those ideas was phenomenal. So we basically took all the comments from the coaches that we were getting. Keenan had also run some information and talked to some other integral coaches, and we sort of put all those comments together and drew out some common themes. And here's basically where we see our opportunities. I guess you could say the problem with our system, but I prefer the word opportunities because I think it's more positive and optimistic, and I just like that anyway. But it's in the spirit of this sort of revolution. So, the first thing we talk about is culture. So for a long time, I think that it's pretty commonplace that you hear butterfly being used as, like a punishment. If a kid has done something wrong, they go and they do, hey, go do a 2 fly, or it's a birthday swim and you've got to do a 100 fly with kickboards being thrown at your face and stuff. So, and then we tell kids from a young age it's the hardest stroke. You got to be super tough to do it. So we started thinking in terms of the culture there, are there opportunities in how we can frame the language around this stroke that can make it more appealing? Are we scaring away some of our best athletes that never want to participate in butterfly, but could be our best butterflyers? In terms of the technique, we have certainly isolated some things in backstroke and in freestyle that have been very power-driven, very easily articulated. We have a great vocabulary, like a library of vocabulary around those things now, and we know that we can really easily identify those things. And I don't think that, and the group kind of felt the same way, that we don't quite have the same pinpoints in butterfly. So what are some things about technique that we can start to look at? Butterfly being much more rhythmic was the word that came up a lot, or it kind of works as a system. There's a lot of different things going on. So when we're talking about those rhythmic patterns, instead of just like an isolation of a catch, how do all those things play into it, and how can we talk about that in a way that our athletes can easily understand and connect with? And then from a training perspective, I mentioned freestyle and backstroke before. I think we can pretty much train those things all day. We can go for a long, long time in those events. You can just put your hand in, catch water, rip it, and keep going. Can we do those same things in butterfly? Does butterfly break down quicker? If it does, do we want to keep training it that way? What does that do to our ability to our ceiling, for our performance markers? So those are sort of the main things we came up with. The culture of butterfly in the United States, some things we want to prioritize from a technique standpoint, and then how we're training it. So those were sort of the main opportunities. And then from there, you can see a lot of words on the screen here, but these were all things that the think tank came up with over and over again that were so integral to getting this conversation. And that's really what this butterfly revolution is. It's a conversation. It's a movement where we want to really ignite a passion for the stroke and the events, both within the coaching community and through that, the athletes. But this won't work unless people like yourselves that are on the webinar today feel empowered and take ownership and try some new things. And so we really want to target you guys to be the leaders of this. and we want to improve the attitude and culture around butterfly because it doesn't do any good if someone from USA Swimming saying it and we're hoping athletes listen. And then we just really want to create that conversation on deck and, like I said, get enthusiasm about it from the grassroots through to the podium. So there's very much a long-term and a short-term game here. So the think tank came up with this concept of a build, promote, achieve approach to butterfly. So the build is making sure that we get everyone from the grassroots through to the 18 and unders, getting butterfly better at that age. Internationally, with our 18 under world rankings, and then also just in the country. So just getting more people excited about swimming the stroke, and then promoting the stroke. That kind of goes to the culture that we mentioned before, promoting the stroke. And then the achieving portion is more of the short term, I guess, which would be within this quad that we're going to be doing some things in the national team division to target some people that are maybe a little closer to that podium potential, some things we can do with that group of athletes there. So the build and promote is really what the think tank and this revolution is going after. The achieve is sort of a different piece there for the more short-term game. So going back to our opportunities here of culture, technique, and training, we came up with 3 questions that we really would love every staff and every coach to be able to answer. And if you're a head coach, be able to ask your assistant coaches, do we have a program answer to this question, which is how do you present butterfly, how do you teach butterfly, and how do you train butterfly? So creating some identity around butterfly in your program. So how do you present butterfly? How do you talk about it? Do we say, hey, you've got to be the toughest person in the pool? Do we talk about it being brutally hard? Or do we talk about the beauty of it and the different ways that we can really take advantage of butterfly? So that represents the culture piece. How do you teach it? Goes into the technique aspect. What are some big technique key components that you and your program believe are important about butterfly? And then how do you train it? Are you doing 3,000s? Are you doing 2,000s? Are you doing a bunch of 25s with tempo trainers on short rest? I think a lot of people can identify probably more with the way Mary T swims than maybe Michael did. So that's some things that we want to bring out in the conversation that we hope can launch from this summer going forward. So those are the 3 questions that the group came up with that I've been asking coaches. And if you guys see me on deck, I'm going to always have my GoPro. I've interviewed some coaches, and I hope to compile that in probably part 3 of our webinar series here. So we took those 3 questions and we figured, what do we want to do with this? And the first thing we decided to do with the webinar series, which obviously you all know about because you're here today, but there's going to be 4 parts to this webinar series, and we're also going to have a social media campaign, which I will comment on later and direct you guys towards that. But this webinar series is really aimed at this build and promote part, which will later lead to the achieve portion. Turn it over to Russell, and Russell's going to kind of talk to the technique side of it. Being such a rocket scientist, I'm going to say all this stuff, it was a big demand from the think tank to make sure that we did something similar with backstroke around 2008, and we saw a big increase in our world rankings then, and it was not to say that putting some conversation about some key points is us taking credit for it, but coaches were saying, remember when you guys did this with backstroke? So Russell was obviously a part of the senior development committee, and the think tank really wanted to get involved. So without further ado, Russell, I'll hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Mitch. Yeah, so last month, Bob Bowman gave a really awesome talk to really ignite this movement that we want to get started. And I took some notes, and these are the ways that I summarized it. So a couple of things. I'll go through it point by point. Basically gave this talk on how he looked at butterfly philosophy and training Michael, and not just Michael, but all the other flyers that he's had through the years. And it was a really awesome perspective. So to start, the first takeaway that I had was preserving technique through all training was really important. That's one thing that he went through a couple sets and went through progressions through different ages, and that's one thing that he always emphasized, that the technique was important and that not letting the stroke break down. Swimming a fatigued fly is not something that's really that helpful. He felt that building endurance through many reps of hundreds or less was key. So endurance is obviously important. Toughness in fly is something synonymous, and that is, he felt that doing that wasn't through like long volumes of fly, but he did it through lots of hundreds or less. So 50s as well, 75, just repeats. In terms of technique, he was big on using the legs, technique and race strategy. So legs are really important, saving the arms in the race. So obviously in other strokes you might say, hey, use your arms and save your legs for the end. But in fly, he felt like using your legs and using your kick throughout the entire race was really important, and having your arms at the end was really important. In his workouts, he always emphasized a knowledge and awareness of kick counts and stroke counts. And that was present through all the sets that he talked about and all the training with Michael that he's done. Another technical point is that the second half of the stroke, he felt that's so important. It was so important to have a relaxed recovery. And you see that with Michael, how kind of, I mean, he makes it obviously look really easy, but if you imagine Michael stroking in your head, obviously a very relaxed recovery. And Bob feels that having a strong second half of the stroke and a strong finish is really important in that. And that doesn't mean really overemphasizing the finish, and that doesn't mean like you're really trying to throw water way out the back, but just being strong in that second half of the stroke. A technical point that Bob felt really was kind of his thing that he looked at was that the hips should be at the highest point before or at when the hands enter the water. So when the hands are entering the water, the hips should be at the highest point in the stroke. And that's something that you can think about and sit on. From a young age, I think Bob said that he got this from when he was with Paul Bergen. From a young age, teaching whole stroke fly, and knowing that the breath is a huge cause of many flaws in the stroke, and obviously a real difficult part. So doing 3 great strokes, no breath, whole stroke, and that's it, and then shutting down and then going easy free or something else the rest of the lap. So again, from a young age all the way through developing as a senior athlete, you see Bob talking about how preserving the technique and how having a whole stroke fly that is good is important. And not at a young age, obviously little kids have a really hard time doing a lot of fly, and so he never let them get to that point by doing 3 strokes. And that, again, something that he got from Paul Bergen. Moving on to the technical priorities that I kind of summarized. This flies a little bit different from the other strokes in my mind, because I think you're, like Mitch referenced before, we pinpoint really specific positions in freestyle, in backstroke, in breaststroke. But in fly, I've kind of reevaluated that, and I think it's more about the movement as a whole rather than a specific position. Mitch mentioned rhythm, and again, it's about the rhythm and the body movement rather than applying as much force on the water at once. And so it becomes a more abstract concept for fly technique than it is something direct. So it's not like I used to prioritize the catch as the most important thing, and I would say it's still a priority, but I would say my new top priority is the forward press. So I'll talk about what this is. I'll tell you where you can find some good video on it too. And then, so forward press being the top priority, having 2 awesome kicks, and that goes back to what Bob said about using your legs throughout the entire race. So having two equal and awesome kicks, and then having the catch. And again, being the catch being the third priority doesn't mean that it's not important. It's still super important. It's just, let's look at the rhythm of the stroke. Let's look at the whole body movement before we, kind of at first, and then think about how we apply force to the water. So let's look at this forward press. The visual result is what we see from above water, what everyone looks for in a great flyer, and that's the hips popping up. If you want the hips popping up, I would say it's not really about the hips going. It's not about pressing the hips towards the surface. It's about this whole movement, this forward press. So the action that happens in this is that the chest is driving forward, and you're trying to press the chest forward, crash your hands forward. You're kicking your hands into the entry. I would say through this movement, the chin is forward. You're not tucking your chin. You're trying to press forward from your hips up. Your entire upper body is trying to move in unison. And if you try to dive your head down, you try to press your forehead down toward the bottom of the pool, you're going to disconnect your head, and it won't be an entire upper body movement in unison. So you have your chest driving forward, you're kicking your hands into your entry, your chin is forward or neutral, and then the hands are entering in line with the shoulders. I would say that the hands entering in line is another visual cue that you can have. I would say that kicking your hands into the entry works together with your hands entering in line with your shoulders. So a narrow entry to me is that your hands aren't in sync with your body, with that forward press. Everything needs to be synced up. Your hands, body, head, hips, kick. Everything needs to be moving together in order for this to be effective. And the visual results are the hips popping up and then the hands entering in line with the shoulders. What this looks like from underwater, this is kind of an isolated shot of that forward press of some of our best athletes at their deepest part of their stroke. And you can see that, first of all, it's not very deep. Second of all, you see that the head is neutral or even a little bit tilted forward. You see where the eyes are looking. At most, you have the bottom and the top athlete looking straight down. But then you have your two middle athletes looking forward, and I would say that that's more common, is slightly tilted forward. You don't see the chin tucked. You see the hands also are at the surface, and then you see the hips being at the highest point. When in action, and there's video on a Facebook group that we'll share at the end. In action, this looks like a very flat stroke, actually, if you're looking at it from underwater. So again, you're trying to go for that forward drive, that forward crash, and that's the ultimate goal. You're not trying to go up and down, you're trying to move forward. Just a note on this, so before the forward press, say you're coming down from a breath, the head will move to get in line with the body. What I've noticed, though, is that the head, a lot of our best will move the head will get back in line and be back in the water before the hands hit the surface, before the hands enter. But then one thing that I noted for all the best is that while they move their head to initiate this press, the head, again, never presses past their line. So that's really important and what I thought was really unique. So they move their head to get back in line, but then they never press it past their line. So that, I would say, is a really important thing to, again, get the body moving together. Moving on to two kicks. So there's an entry kick, and some people call it the first kick or the top kick, and then there's the exit kick. You have your second kick, which also being called the second kick or the bottom kick. The entry kick coincides with the forward press. That is the kick that you kick your hands forward. That one, I would say, is what pretty much all flyers that I've seen have. It's just a natural movement in the body. The exit kick is the critical piece. That's the one that people miss. That is one that it has to be a conscious movement too. So you have to force your knees to bend, and you could call it you force your knees to bend, you bring your knees forward, you drop your knees towards the bottom of the pool. Anyway, there has to be some kind of conscious knee bend that wouldn't happen unless someone is trying to do it. Your feet will finish deep in this kick. Again, I'll reference this video that you'll have access to, and you'll see that the feet are finishing deeper than what you would generally think. They finish below the line of the body. It's connected to the pull finish, so as you finish your stroke, you can the kick of that second kick is finishing too. So these things are all working together. The finish of the stroke, the exit kick. Again, you have to force that to happen. The other thing that to keep in mind is that this is the kick where you see the feet come out of the water generally. And the reason being is that people will bend their knees to set up this kick, but if you don't allow your knees to get deep enough, your feet will just pop right out of the water and you're kicking air. So that's one thing I think to keep in mind too, is to allow your knees to get a little bit of depth, to let them go down, keep your feet in the water, and that will help you be able to catch water on this kick. And I think that's one of the hard things, is that a lot of people bend their knees and their feet pop out of the water, and that's why they don't ever have this kick. The difference between someone without a second kick and with a second kick, and this is, again, is in a video that's on the Facebook group, is the fact that people are bending their knees. Moving on to the last priority is the catch. So I would say you're just looking at some degree of elbow bend is what you're looking for. It doesn't have to be this 90-degree catch. Some degree of catch. This is actually a much harder skill to get than in freestyle. Just having to deal with two arms at once, it's a much harder position to achieve. So just looking for some degree of elbow bend. You're looking for your palms facing back is another cue you can use. And then basically from the entry point, right in front of the shoulders, the hands are going wide and back. Fingers pointing down. Let's take a look at what this looks like. Still shot of two of our best flyers. Again, some degree of bend. You'll see differences in these still shots, and you'll have access to these images as well that you can use for reference. And then two of our best women. Again, you see very different degrees of that bend, but you're obviously, what you don't want is, you don't want the elbow leading the way. You don't want the elbow drop. You just want the elbow to stay on top. And again, I would say having the biggest catch isn't the key. It's having a great forward press, using your body well. And that's what everybody has in common. You see different degrees of catch, and that's, I mean, in all of our best. So that, to me, is not necessarily the dominant positive aspect for what's happening here. Again, video for all of this will be on the Facebook group, and here's Mitch.
All right, so that's sort of where we're going to leave it today in terms of the technique stuff. This is the point of today's webinar, is just to get the idea of this movement out there, to get the conversation started on a big level. And I want to show you guys some different platforms and vehicles we're going to use. Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, if you guys can use the hashtag USAButterfly. And as I believe is on your screen, we have created a Facebook group called USA Butterfly Revolution. I believe right now you have to approve for a request, which will obviously approve everybody. We're just working on the finer points of the technical aspects there. But we want this to be a big platform where you guys can go. Russell and I have uploaded some content there already just to get some conversation started. But we really want this to be a vehicle for everyone to talk about each other, their philosophies, challenge each other, and then ignite some change and some positive direction. So we talked before about numbers being one of our greatest strengths. The other one, I travel a lot internationally, and a lot of coaches from other countries be like, why are you guys so good? And I always say our numbers, and the second thing I say is our diversity in coaching. And we've obviously been playing the numbers game with Butterfly, and I think it's time to really maximize our diversity in coaching. And the more that we can get that out in the public sphere and talk about it, the more opportunity we have to build off upon each other and really have some great ideas going. So I know when we started this presentation, we showed the podium, and there's a lot of coaches on here today that may be thinking, hey, I'm never going to have a podium athlete, but you don't know who's in your lane as an 8 or 9 or 10 or 11, 12-year-old right now that is going to be in a position to do that one day. And the things you're teaching them with Butterfly, the way you're talking about the stroke, there's so much on, the think tank. We would kind of send these things. We'd see from each other online about, tweets from, these Instagram and Twitter swimmer problem, those type people saying, butterfly is the hardest stroke, and there's this stigma against butterfly. So, you guys have an opportunity here to really, from a young age, change that and get some people having a positive experience with the stroke. So this webinar today was just to start that conversation, show you guys where the platforms are. The upcoming webinars are going to feature some interviews from Ron Forrest, some interviews from Terry McKeever. So they've both kind of the developmental and college coach of Dana Vollmer. I'm sure we'll have some more stuff from Bob coming up as well. We've also done some things with Sharon Powers, who was Ian Crocker's coach. So definitely want to be sharing some of those conversations. And I think when we break down their experiences with the athletes, it's really going to be great for you guys to see the different things that they did training-wise that we probably don't think that they did, because we relate more to maybe what might have been done with Mary T. So that's where we're going to leave it today. If you guys want to log on and start looking at the Facebook group, start commenting, please share that as much as you can, and just get the word out. You guys all have a part to play in this, and I know that together, if we're inspiring each other and sharing our ideas, you know, we're definitely going to be better for this in the long run. So, you know, thank you so much for your time today. Please log on, start talking with people across the country, start talking with people in your LSCs, start talking with your staff, start talking with your athletes, and also just talk with us. I want to hear your ideas and thoughts. We're kind of using this steal a page out of Silicon Valley and open sourcing, which for those of you who might not be familiar, it's if, you know, Apple will release the code to everybody so that people can work on it, and as different people have improvements, they'll send it back to Apple, and that's kind of what we're using here. So as you guys start to have sets and drills, post them on that group or send them to me directly, and we'll get the word out on a mass scale. So, you know, together we move forward, and it's going to be an amazing thing that we can all look back at and know we all played a part in. So thanks for your time today. I really appreciate it.